When two fake cops tried to pull off a sneaky scam using garbage violations, they thought they picked the perfect victim, but one clever resident flipped the script, exposed the entire con, and left the scammers humiliated in front of the whole neighborhood. You won't believe how this mind-blowing twist unraveled. In a quiet suburban neighborhood known for its calm streets and friendly atmosphere, an unusual disturbance began to unfold. It started subtly, just a few printed notices stuck to trash bins and mailboxes, warning homeowners about garbage can violations. At first, most residents assumed it was a new initiative from city sanitation. The flyers, printed on generic paper with official-looking fonts, warned of fines up to $250 for leaving bins on the curb past the collection time. Alongside the warning was a demand. Violators were instructed to call a hotline or pay in cash to resolve the issue and avoid escalation. The confusion quickly escalated into concern when two men appeared, dressed in uniforms that resembled those worn by municipal officers. Their attire looked official at first glance: navy blue shirts with silver nameplates, dark caps with vaguely city-like logos, and utility belts that added to the illusion. They carried clipboards, gave stern lectures about city codes, and claimed to be part of a specialized neighborhood waste enforcement division, a name that sounded plausible but had never been mentioned in any previous city communication. They went door to door, speaking confidently and authoritatively. Residents who opened their doors were told they had been documented violating new trash bin policies. The alleged rules were detailed and confusing, referencing obscure-sounding sections of municipal code and new regulations supposedly passed to keep neighborhoods clean and compliant. The men cited infractions like bins left out more than 2 hours past pickup, lids not fully closed, or improper placement within 18 inches of the sidewalk. For each offense, they claimed homeowners would be fined, but there was a convenient option to pay the fine immediately and clear the record. The pressure tactics were subtle but effective. The supposed officers warned that refusal to pay on the spot could lead to larger penalties, reported violations on property records, or even city citations that might affect mortgage or insurance rates. The suggestion was clear: pay now, avoid hassle later. It was a con carefully crafted to sound bureaucratic enough to confuse and intimidate the average resident. At first, the scam worked. A handful of residents, caught off guard and unsure whether the enforcement was real, reluctantly handed over cash, typically around $50 to $100, to avoid what they thought could become a bigger legal problem. The fake officers would issue handwritten receipts on carbon copy pads, labeled with the same fictitious division name, giving the operation just enough superficial legitimacy to slip past suspicion. Some of the more elderly or non-English-speaking residents were the easiest targets, with one woman reportedly paying twice in the same week due to unclear instructions and repeated visits. But as the number of visits increased, so did the skepticism. Questions started circulating in the local Facebook group and on neighborhood watch chat threads. One post asked whether anyone else had been fined for leaving trash bins out too long, prompting a flurry of responses from confused and frustrated residents. People compared notes, photos of the tickets, and stories of the uniformed men, slowly realizing that something didn't add up. Despite their convincing appearance, the so-called officers hadn't shown official badges. Their vehicles were unmarked. None of the citations matched what was listed on the city sanitation website. A few vigilant residents called the actual city waste management department to inquire about the new enforcement policy. To their shock, the department confirmed there was no such thing as a neighborhood waste enforcement division. There had been no new regulations passed, no authorized citations issued, and certainly no legitimate reason for anyone to be collecting cash payments door to door for trash-related infractions. Even more concerning, the city stated they had received multiple reports from other parts of town about similar incidents. It appeared that these imposters were operating in multiple neighborhoods, using the same tactics and materials to target unsuspecting households. It became clear this wasn't just a prank or isolated scam, it was an organized scheme. The neighborhood's confusion turned into collective anger as more stories emerged. Parents worried about their children answering the door to armed strangers pretending to be officers. Tenants feared retaliation from landlords for violations they hadn't committed. Local businesses were even warned when garbage bins behind small shops were sighted, pushing the scam beyond just residential targets. The operation had clearly been planned with precision. The scammers had likely studied local enforcement patterns and designed a strategy that played on residents' fear of municipal overreach and lack of familiarity with exact code. By targeting something as mundane but regulated as garbage bins, they had found the perfect weak spot. An issue so minor it often went unchecked, yet so bureaucratically vague that few knew the rules well enough to question authority. However, it wouldn't last forever. As residents began to pool information and contact actual authorities, momentum began to shift. A sense of urgency grew among the community to identify the scammers, report the incidents properly, and protect those who might still be vulnerable to the deception. With the truth emerging and more eyes watching the neighborhood closely, the stage was set for a dramatic turning of the tables. As more residents grew uneasy, one particularly observant individual took it upon themselves to dig deeper into the legitimacy of the so-called enforcement officers. The red flags were piling up, starting with the inconsistencies in their uniforms. Unlike official city enforcement, these men lacked any verifiable badges or ID cards. The silver nameplates were generic and didn't match the standard format used by municipal departments. Their hats bore emblems that looked official from a distance, but, on closer inspection, were nothing more than embroidered symbols with no government affiliation. Then came the language on the notices. While the documents mimicked the structure of formal citations, the wording was oddly vague. Terms like public nuisance infraction and waste regulation penalty appeared without any references to actual municipal code sections. Furthermore, the contact number listed on the ticket didn't match any city department and went straight to a prepaid mobile line with a generic voicemail greeting. These were not the hallmarks of a legitimate city operation. This sharp resident, suspicious of the entire operation, began documenting everything. They kept one of the notices for evidence, took photos of the fake officers during their rounds from a discreet distance, and even started recording brief video clips. Their instincts told them that this was more than just a misunderstanding, it was a premeditated scam targeting the trust of everyday people. They also turned to the internet for confirmation. A thorough search of the city's official website showed no mention of a neighborhood waste enforcement division. No announcements, no news releases, no updates on new garbage regulations. When the resident called the city directly, officials confirmed their suspicions. No such division existed, and there were no door-to-door enforcers authorized to collect payments. Armed with this information, the residents started warning neighbors and advising others not to pay or engage with the imposters. But they didn't stop there. Recognizing the opportunity to expose the scam once and for all, the resident began planning a more detailed strategy. By gathering recordings, preserving physical evidence, and monitoring the scammers' patterns, they prepared to confront the fraudsters in a way that could not be denied, and that would ultimately lead to their downfall. With mounting evidence and growing support from neighbors, the resident took action to expose the imposters once and for all. A carefully orchestrated plan was set into motion, aimed at catching the fake officers in the act. Using a combination of discreetly installed cameras, printed city ordinance materials, and coordinated communication with nearby neighbors, the resident created a situation designed to leave the scammers with no escape. At the heart of the plan was a bait setup, one that included purposefully leaving trash bins out past collection time, in full view of the street, and clearly visible to anyone driving by. The goal was to trigger another visit from the fake enforcers, which, based on their pattern of behavior, was highly likely. Surrounding homes were alerted, and multiple neighbors kept their phones ready to record from porches, windows, and even cars parked nearby. The resident also ensured that clear footage of the license plate on the scammer's vehicle could be captured. When the imposters returned, the cameras rolled. The resident engaged them calmly, but strategically, asking pointed questions that would force inconsistencies in their responses. Questions about the exact department they worked for, who their supervisor was, which municipal codes they were enforcing, and why their citations lacked official documentation were met with vague or deflective answers. When asked to show identification, they offered none. The more they spoke, the more their story fell apart. All of it was caught on multiple cameras, including close-up footage of the scammers' faces, voices, and vehicle. The footage was not only crystal clear, but also legally gathered, showing the men attempting to collect money under the guise of a non-existent agency. The resident then calmly informed them that the city had confirmed they were not legitimate officers and that all their actions had been recorded and reported to local authorities. This revelation visibly rattled the scammers. No longer in control, they stumbled through their excuses, tried to backpedal, and ultimately rushed to leave. But the damage was already done. The trap had worked. The residents' methodical planning had caught them in a web of their own deception, with undeniable proof ready to be handed over to law enforcement. With overwhelming video evidence in hand, the residents submitted everything to local law enforcement and posted a short clip of the confrontation to a popular neighborhood forum. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The footage spread quickly, first across community social media groups, then to broader citywide pages, and eventually onto larger platforms where it gained viral attention. People were shocked not only by the boldness of the scam, but also by how meticulously the resident had exposed it. Local police, now armed with definitive proof, launched a formal investigation. Using the license plate number and the video evidence, authorities identified the two individuals responsible for impersonating officers and collecting fraudulent fines. Within days, warrants were issued and the suspects were located and arrested. Charges included impersonating public officials, attempted fraud, and unlawful solicitation of funds. The swift action by law enforcement sent a clear message that such scams would not be tolerated. The neighborhood erupted in support of the resident who had exposed the fraud. Many neighbors expressed their gratitude, posting thank you notes, offering assistance, and even organizing a small community event to acknowledge the efforts that had protected them all. What had once caused fear and confusion turned into a moment of community pride. The incident became a catalyst for increased vigilance and stronger neighborhood cooperation. In the aftermath, the city issued an official statement to clarify the rules regarding trash collection and reinforced that no city department would ever request cash payments at the door. Flyers and digital announcements were circulated to help residents identify legitimate city employees and distinguish them from impersonators. The event served as a powerful educational opportunity, helping prevent future scams by equipping residents with the knowledge they needed to recognize red flags. The residents' proactive approach was even highlighted by local media as an example of how awareness, comm strategy, and evidence gathering could successfully counter community fraud. The case became a local legend not because of a scam itself, but because of how a single person's quick thinking turned the tables and protected an entire neighborhood from further exploitation. Through unity and information sharing, the community emerged stronger, smarter, and more connected than ever before. For more unbelievable neighborhood showdowns and justice served right, subscribe now to expect stories.